Hi, welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. I'm here today with a friend of mine from Port Townsend that we've just met, and he's also from Chicago, Robert L. Powers, who's an expert and author in the field of Adlerian psychology. And we're hearing feedback. There we go. Good, thank you. So, and Bob, better known as Bob. Bob, welcome to be here. Glad You're here.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be with you.
Yeah.
Good to be with you in Port Townsend.
So maybe you could help us. What in a nutshell, is Adlerian psychology, and what excites you about it?
Psychology is a strange science, and so I'll try to put it in that framework. The psyche is something that cannot be seen. Whether there is such a thing is dubious. We have no way of looking into ourselves. All of the organs of perception are designed to look outside of ourselves. The question is about our motives. What is it that gets us to do certain things? How are we motivated toward and away from things? That question doesn't arise until democratic social living begins in the latter part of the 18th century. 1775 is the first cure by Mesmer, by the power of suggestion. And 1776 begins the War of American Independence, Declaration of Independence. So at that period, democracy demands that we inquire as to motivation, because prior to that, in autocratic social living, nobody cared what your motives were. The question was whether you obeyed.
Fascinating.
So if you obey, you're rewarded. If you disobey, you're punished. And you didn't need to know anything about the psyche or about how people felt about things or what their ideas were. Now, when the question arises, well, what is it that people are thinking about, and what are they doing, especially when they do peculiar things, when they have fits and hysterical seizures, and when they hear voices and have paranormal experiences of all kinds, what's going on? And the 19th century was full of speculation about that. Adler comes at the latter part of the century, and he was the only one of those pioneers in modern-day personality theory to put the question in the context of the emerging democratic social revolution. The others were interested, Freud especially, in instinctual processes or organismic processes, and hoped to be able to account for human behavior in terms of organic, chemical, cellular behavior of one kind or another. Jung, as you know, was interested in grand historical questions and symbolic questions and art and rose windows and mandalas and things like that. They keep showing up here and there all over the world, and thought there must be something about these things that helps people organize their way of being in the world. And Adler, who didn't know Jung, by the way, they were quite separate. Jung was a Swiss, Adler was a Viennese. Adler addressed himself more to the question of what's going on with the people who are displaying these symptoms in their general lives. Most of these people who are attracting the attention of doctors, Adler was a physician. He was, first of all, a physician of the eye. He was an ophthalmologist. But as you know, ophthalmologists get interested in how people look at things as well as how the mechanics of the eye operate. And so Adler raised a different kind of question from the others. He said, what's going on in the lives of these people, most of whom, you must remember, were women who produced hysterical symptoms.
Suffering from hysteria.
Quite.
Yes.
They were falling down, having weeping fits and so forth.
Yes.
And
The
having
weaker sex.
Yes, the weaker sex. Yes, who defeated the men in their lives by falling down, having fits, weeping and carrying on, and getting their way by what Adler called water power. the effusion of tears.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they were fighting back in an unfair kind of fight. They didn't have the same levers of influence that men had and so on. And they were terribly abused. I don't mean to minimize the abuse of women, but the counter struggle, the countervailing struggle of women who were having hysterical fits, Adler saw as really kind of a guerrilla warfare. And he saw it for what it was and respected it for a desperate effort of people who were at a disadvantage to fight their battles. Now, he also put that in his own mind against the background of general human development, the development of the human being. He was interested in embryonic development, and that was an important part of his thinking, that the embryo develops for each of us out of the genetic material in ways that are unique to each of us. And each of us has certain weaknesses in the system for which we struggle as organisms to compensate, against which we compensate. So that all of life, from the time of birth onward, is a struggle to adapt to a difficult, challenging situation. And so his earliest ideas were that the human being can be understood as a lifelong struggle against the inferiority of his own organism, which finally eventuates in death. So it's a losing struggle. He has to win. He can only win the struggle by means of a symbolic attachment to something that goes beyond his death. Now, out of that, he noticed, however, that socially people can be treated as inferior organisms if they are women. And in the struggle in his day, the feminist struggle, which began, of course, long ago, back around the turn of the century, he noted that a girl who can hear the ideas or feel the ideas of her culture that being a woman is inherently inferior, that there's something wrong with it, has to struggle against that, not simply against the weaknesses of her organism, but against the definition of her person as an inferior organism. And so she takes up a position, if she's got any kind of fight in her at all, that she wants to be treated with the same dignity with which men are treated. And so he understood the woman's movement in his day as being an understandable struggle against the definition of inferiority. Treat me like a man.
Interesting. Let me just kind of summarize what I'm hearing and then take off again. I love this point that there really wasn't a need to look at human motivation until the democratic process became aware. Well, that of course not. Yeah, it's really an interesting piece. And the other piece is that it sounds like you're saying that Adler took an emphasis on the struggle that each person has, not only that each person sort of was seated with an inferiority that they needed to struggle against, and also possibly the cultural context would also put them in an inferior position in some way.
Yes. You see, the inferior is the joke is, there's a cartoon there where the psychiatrist says to the woman in his office, "You don't have an inferiority complex, Mrs. Tompkins. You're inferior." Well, of course, the joke makes us laugh because it's true of each of us. We are inferior. We have, as organisms, we are very funny things. Human beings are odd kind of mammals who go about on their hind legs all the time and don't have enough hair to cover themselves and can't run as fast as the others and don't have claws and teeth that are worth anything. So we have to get together with one another to protect ourselves against the difficulties of life. Now, all of those things we should just assume. Human life is a perilous kind of enterprise. It takes civilization to enable us to live. The thing was, in Adler's day, at the turn of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, and he was the first real 20th century thinker about human beings, because he thought holistically. The whole organism is always struggling to adapt to its environment, and the social environment is the key environment. The human environment is other people. We can adapt to any physical environment anywhere because of our culture. We can live in the desert sands or the polar north, in igloos and things. But our human environment, the social environment, is the key one. And he first spotted it in the protest of women against their inferior status, which, he said, led to a disturbance in the psyche not only of girls but also of boys. Because if the women are defined as inferior, ipso facto, the boys are defined as superior, and they'd better damn well behave as if they were. Because if they don't, then maybe they're really feminine. And if they're feminine, they're weak. And if they're weak, they're worthless, etc., etc., etc. So the little girl who has any kind of sense of value says, "Treat me like a man." The little boy says, "Treat me like a real man." And you have all the kind of contesting, sort of compensating struggles that kids go through and that people go through, and that makes for wackiness and conflict and all sorts of power drives and everything else. Now, later he saw that this feeling of inferiority, which underlies all of our thinking, it's an awareness we always have. If you ask any child, what are you going to be when you grow up? He'll give you an index to his feeling of inferiority by telling you how he will overcome it. I'm going to be a fireman, and ride in a big truck and put out fires, stuff like that, do big, powerful things. Or be a policeman, shoot bad guys and things. All of those things betray the effort to go above what I am now. That we do all our life. I am now, at my advanced age, no longer what I was as a child, not yet what I hope to be. I hope still to study, to learn, to move, to grow, to do things. So that's the course of human life. But that definition of inferiority was only part of it, that sense that we have of being little in a big world. The other part of it is our sense of connection. And he became aware of that after his separation from Freud was finally completed. He became more and more aware of the tremendous, deep sense of connectedness with other people. That is a part of our sense of self from the beginning, because it is revealed in our language. That we can speak to each other is the social reality of our life. Even what I tell you about myself, I tell you in a language that we both speak. It's my story. I may tell you the story I tell myself. That's what I tell people when I tell you who I am. I tell you the same story I tell myself, or I tell you a version of it. So he saw that as well as having a basic feeling of inferiority, we have a basic feeling of solidarity. And the one is really compensatory against the other. So the feeling of inferiority is tolerated and tolerable to the extent that the feeling of solidarity is strong. And that goes into eternity, the feeling of being one in the cosmos with whatever's going on, whatever God has in mind for us. And still to be discovered. So this underlies all subjectivity. You and I have opinions about everything, about our height, our weight, our income, and our associates and friends and so on. But underneath all of our opinions, all of our judgments, all of our subjectivity, there lies a certain sense we have. He borrowed this, of course, from others. Adler didn't get this out of his forehead. This comes out of Immanuel Kant, Kantian philosophy. The sense of, in Kant he uses the Latin sensus privatus, the sense of privation, and the sensus communalis, I think is the way he puts it, the sense of being connected. And those two awarenesses are like pillars of objectivity in a world of subjectivity.
So how this relates to, I mean, I'm tracking on you on about 3 different levels here.
I'm afraid so.
One thing is that it's, to me as a person, how I understand myself, it sounds like one of the things that you're saying is that one way I should understand myself is that I should understand myself in terms of the struggles. My own motivation comes from a certain struggle to surmount my inferiority.
Yeah, which you will do in any case. You don't have to think very much about it. A child from very early on struggles to keep his balance before he begins to take steps. And after he takes steps, he learns how to run. And after he learns how to run, he'll show you he can stand on one foot. And after he learns how to stand on one foot, he'll show you he can hop.
So just this nature of play is overcoming these inferiorities.
Moving forward in terms of what you can do. I like to tell my students that the cry, "Look, Ma, no hands," is the primal scream. That's what people are saying their whole lives long. Look what I can do.
Yes.
Look what is possible. Look what can be done. Look, beyond us, beyond this. But infants do it too. Look, Mom, watch this, watch this.
So does this relate to, say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes, Maslow was a student of Adler.
So part of that would be, look, Ma, no hands
Yeah.
is like esteem needs, and then maybe there's the next challenge would be for self-actualization or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. The sad thing about Maslow is that he did introduce the notion of needs, you see, and needs is such a slippery word. Who knows anything about what we need, what we want, what we desire, what we aspire toward is infinite.
Yes.
So always more, that's the human story. More. Farther. What's on the other side of the mountain?
Right.
And all that kind of thing. But Maslow had a schema, and it was certainly very appealing. A lot of people followed.
So maybe Adler hung out more in the self-actualizing part of that schema, which is about the expansive, aspirational part of it.
I don't know how he would have dealt with the term self-actualizing. He died, after all, in 1937, and Maslow went on and devised his scheme. Adler was much more interested in the extent of the social feeling, the extent to which I sense myself to be part of things, that this is my world, its trouble is my trouble, its blessings are my blessings.
So I, as a microcosm of the larger
I'm a participant.
society.
I'm a participant. I'm not a victim of anything that's going on. I'm a participant in it. What's going on is me. I'm going on.
So when we get an airplane crashing into the World Trade Center, somehow I'm responsible for that, or I'm a participant in that?
Maybe in some, yes, of course, some very hazy way, I'm responsible for the fact that there are people who don't like me.
Yeah.
If I'd had an opportunity to speak to them, I might have had my way with them. But that's, of course, gets into mysticism. I don't mean to say that had I behaved differently in the course of my life, those people wouldn't have been insane. What I can say is that had we behaved differently in the course of our lives, there would be less insanity and people wouldn't be so hateful against other people. But that's an ancient wisdom. That's an ancient wisdom. That's not something discovered in psychology. Psychology has to replace the wisdom with some scientific understanding of what actually happens. We influence the environment in which we live. It's better to see it closer to home. People complain about their spouses, but they don't see how annoying they are to their spouses. Mm-hmm. That's puts it much closer to home. Or people complain about how disrespectful their children are, to make an even finer point, and don't hear themselves speaking to their children in insulting, sarcastic, critical, and antagonistic tones. So they speak to their children in ways that are insulting, and are surprised when their children speak back to them in ways that are insulting, and they're left to say, the sort of dumb things people say about kids. Kids nowadays behave like their parents nowadays.
So there's kind of one of the things about Adler, it sounds like, and his disciples and people that have followed in his tradition, is that it's something about speaking for the downtrodden in a way. There seems to be a rectifying orientation to, or a compassionate orientation to people that are somehow on the underside of life.
Well, in a way, yes, but it's not all that nice all the time. I mean, it'd be easier to put it in more realistic terms and say, beware of the downtrodden. Beware of anyone who feels inferior to you. He's likely to try to cut you down to size.
Yes.
A primary cartoon is a little boy with a snowball knocking off a man's topsilk hat,
Right.
Bringing him down to size. We can't tolerate people who elevate themselves above us, and we're delighted to see how they fall.
So
Enron
to the
is the current example.
Oh, the Enron's the current example, yes. Or the United States is a current example to the Arab world,
Well,
I
I
suppose.
suppose we are, yeah, of course, because they feel as if we have a kind of cultural imperium, which we have. We're stuck being Rome, you know. Rome came from the Tiber to the Thames to the Potomac.
So how do we, in terms of prescriptions for fixing things, what would Adler say to us about
We
that?
have to see our situation more clearly. We have to understand where we are. We have to understand that our behavior is more to be in, how shall I put this? If you want to understand human behavior, inquire more into purpose than into process. What people are doing has a purpose. They're attempting to achieve something. And if their idea of human life is erroneous, if they think that the way to overcome the inferiority feeling is to attain to a position of superiority over other people, they're making a serious error, a common error, but a serious error. If they think that the way to feel better about myself is to make certain that I can be elevated over you, all I'll do is antagonize you. And you will then feel resentful, and if you have any sense at all, you'll do your best to cut me down to size. So I won't feel very happy. I'll feel as though people are forever trying to cut me down to size. How come everybody is so unkind to me? I may wind up feeling that, to oversimplify matters. If you want to overcome the feeling of superiority, work toward solidarity. Work toward being someone valued by other people. That's where the real compensation comes. Work toward what all the sages and wise men have always told us. Work toward a world in which people love one another, take care of one another, are concerned about one another. And then you will overcome your feelings of inferiority. You'll be someone who is valued everywhere he shows up.
So what would that motivation be for somebody to do that? And it seems to me that I'm trying to come back to your earlier point about motivation.
Yes.
And having purpose. And it seems to me one thing Adler's doing is saying that it's all purposeful, that each individual is always acting with purpose.
Well, I don't want to make any absolute statements of that kind which get picked on. I think it's much better to say, if you're trying to understand someone, some peculiar behavior, ask the question, what is he trying to get from it? What does he hope will come of it? It's a little clearer question. If you ask what makes him do that, which is the common question,
Yeah.
well, his glands do.
His glands.
And where did he get those glands? Well,
Yeah.
his genes gave them to him. And where did he get those genes? Well,
Yeah.
the baboons had them, didn't they?
Yeah.
Bumping around in Africa. But what can we do about that? I mean, what do we learn if we learn about baboons? It's much better to say, what's he up to? What does he hope to achieve in this bizarre behavior? What is it he's driving toward? And
So in the words of my book, which you've read, one perspective is kind of cause-push, and the other is sort of future-pull. And it seems like Adler's
Yes.
more oriented to the future-pull side of things.
Yes, there's all sorts of stuff that does cause and so forth, and there are, we know that there are intoxicants that swamp the central nervous system, and there are illnesses and brain syndromes and so forth that make people, that impair people's functioning. But by and large, what we want, even then we want to ask, what do people intoxicate themselves for? And what are people with impaired functioning still trying to achieve? And we know that people who have a strong social feeling will try to achieve things that are on the useful side of life. I notice that you're aware of the time. Should I be more aware?
No, you're doing fine.
Should I be more aware than I am?
No, you're just doing fine. I'm really wrapped up in the conversation, and I don't think we need to worry.
Well, I'm not paying any attention at the
Yeah.
time. I want people to know that I've written a book.
Ah, that's a thought.
Yes,
That's a
and
good
I do-
point.
I
And I
do-
brought it here, I have it here. Let's see, I'll hold it up to this
Yeah.
camera right here. And understanding lifestyle, the psycho-clarity process.
Yes. Now
And maybe
those-
we have a nugget. You could tell us a little bit about what
Yeah.
you try to do in the book.
Yeah, and that's such a nice introduction to the thought I had next, and that is that Adler's term for personality was lifestyle. That's
Yeah.
what he came to employ. He borrowed the term from Max Weber, who was the father of sociology. Max Weber gives us lifestyle as to the kind of wallpaper we choose and
Yeah.
where we go on vacation and so on. For Adler, it was the style of personal movement. He saw that every human being is a unique individual. Individual means indivisible. That's an important part of his psychology. It's not a clarifying term by and large because people misunderstand it. Individual means undividable. It means something that can't be cut in pieces. And Adler said the human being is indivisible. Unfortunately, it wasn't until he had established himself under the title of individual psychology, which in German means more indivisible psychology, that the term holism came into use among English-speaking people thanks to John Smuts and his book Holism and Evolution. And Adler and Smuts had some conversations. Am I going over time?
No, you're fine, I think.
Well, anyway, individual, it's too bad that he didn't know Smuts earlier. He would have picked the term holistic psychology and he would have been the father of us, because he was the first holistic thinker. Lifestyle is the style of movement of the whole unique individual organism.
Okay.
The style of living, the way in which a person lives. You know that there's a different handwriting everyone has. You can get if you still get letters penned by hand, cards and notes penned by hand, and you have a friend whom you love, you can recognize the handwriting right away.
Yes.
It's the style of that person's life revealed in movement, and that was his term for the individual, unique style of every person. The psychoclarity process is the process we seized upon that word psychoclarity, or contrived it, my wife Jane Griffith and I, to describe the process of clarification that a person has to go through in the course of counseling, or what's called psychotherapy. We would rather call it the psychoclarity process. Take away the disease notions. People are mistaken about things. They make mistakes. There's no way to avoid them. We live in a world in which we have to make up our mind, what kind of a world is this, and no one knows. Only God knows. And at the end, he will reveal it. In all of all apocalyptic literature, that's the way it is. We live in a world not of our own making. We find ourselves in it. And we have to make some sense of it. But we make mistakes. Our judgment is faulty. And the psychoclarity process attempts to reveal to people in their own common sense that their mistakes are mistaken.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. It's a lot
I'm
of
getting
fun.
the word that there's 1 minute left, but by my clock there's 6 minutes left.
Oh, so that's it. There you are, you see.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, so I guess we should wrap it up, because the control room's telling me that my clock's goofy.
Well, it's a lot to say in a half an hour, and it's been fun for me to try to condense it in this way, and you're very kind to invite me to be with you.
I'm fascinated. I like you say, we're really time limited with a half hour, but it seems like one of the key messages that Adler, that is a wonderful thing that I'm going to continue pursuing, is this idea of motivation coming out of the democratic movement, because as I'm very fascinated by it.
Yes.
And how
the autocratic social living is Jung. People who are interested in Jung would say is probably structural. It probably comes out of family life, and probably is an evolutionary thing, and it probably will always be an element of all social living. But finally, even the king has to answer to the people.
Yes.
And however it's structured, the people will get rid of Enron and all of its errors.
So that life ultimately is bottom up as opposed to top down.
Yes, ultimately the reality is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you, Bob, and you and I are going to continue talking anyway, I'm sure.
Yes.
But this has been a wonderful opportunity, and I hope all of you have felt some of the excitement that I felt here in talking to Robert L. Powers, and he and his wife, Jane Griffith, have written Understanding Lifestyle, the Psychoclarity Process. And thank you very much.
Thank you, too. Thank you very much.